Nobody imagined that a dead battery would spark a storm. It was a blistering morning, the sun hitting the corrugated roof and turning the workshop into a glass oven. The smell of grease and old diesel was as familiar there as breathing. Samuel had opened his tiny workshop at dawn, fingers stained with oil, a rag tucked into the back pocket of his trousers, the metal bench cluttered with sockets and a battered wrench. He was a mechanic who had learned to fix engines with his hands long before he learned to write a proper letter. The dust on his boots told the story of long days, and the sweat on his forehead tasted like resigned hope. He had Amina, his wife, thin-voiced and steady, and Kemi, their 9-year-old daughter with a laugh like a small bell, who waited at home for a warm stew and the promise that school fees would be paid. The money was frayed around the edges. At noon he had $3,000 in his wallet from the only motorbike he'd fixed that week. Then the phone rang, a driver on the other end, breathless. The governor's convoy stalled at the new gated estate. The car would not start. Samuel wiped his hands on his rag and pushed the battered toolbox into the pickup. At the estate gate, a black SUV glinted, chrome reflecting a world that smelled of polished wood and lemon oil, the grass trimmed with surgical precision. A woman in a white coat stepped out, her bracelets chiming like small coins, her perfume sharp against the warm air. Her shoes were clean enough to cut paper. Up close, she looked older than the newspapers said. There were creases at the corners of her eyes and a tiredness that did not match the sparkle of her bracelets. She introduced herself as Esther Okafor and did not hide the loneliness behind her greeting. After an hour, when the car started and the engine purred, she handed him an envelope with bills and a card with gold lettering. "If you ever need help, call," she said. Samuel's hand trembled as he folded the card into his pocket. At home, Amina touched the money with suspicion. "Don't take calls from people like that," she said. But 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from Kemi's school, unpaid fees, deadline in 7 days. Samuel found the card and, with a throat full of pride and shame, dialed the number. Her voice was warm on the line. "Come tomorrow," she said. That call carried a promise and a threat in the same breath. Samuel's past had shaped the way he moved through the world. He had been a boy in a neighborhood of corrugated roofs and open drains, his childhood marked by the scrape of soccer cleats on dirt and the metallic scent of a neighbor's radio. His father had been a night watchman at the hospital and had taught him to respect tools and timetables. When his father died of an infection that a small clinic could not treat, Samuel felt the world tilt. He apprenticed at his Uncle Musa's workshop and learned to listen to engines the way others listened to prayer. He could tell from a cough whether a diesel pump was tired or a carburetor was clogged. He had left formal school early to earn food and to pay for a small wooden bed for Kemi, and those early responsibilities hardened him into someone who measured risk like a technician measured voltage. He carried a faded diploma board that he never framed, not because he did not value it, but because each day demanded choices between pride and survival. The memory of his father's hands on his shoulder was both a comfort and a caution. He had promised, once, to never let his daughter go hungry. He had a brother, Daniel, who worked at the municipal market and sent what he could. There was Jamal, the driver, who borrowed tools sometimes, and Fatima, a neighbor, who lent sugar when the cupboard went bare. That childhood made him fiercely practical and quietly hopeful. And when Esther's card warmed his palm, he was less dazzled by the gold letters than by the possibility of a few months of school payments. Those roots connected to every decision he would later make. The first real meeting with that other world happened at midday in a glass foyer scented with lemon and a faint antiseptic. Samuel arrived in the small pickup, his shirt damp at the collar, the smell of oil clinging to his sleeves. Esther waited by a potted palm, her manicure precise, a bracelet catching sun in tiny arcs. The conversation that followed would be replayed in Samuel's thoughts for months, every word edged with the softness of opportunity. "You fixed my car?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "It was the alternator and the battery was dead," he answered, wiping his palms on his trousers. "You don't often see hands like yours in places like this," she said. People talk about mechanics like we are a different breed. He shrugged. A car is a problem. I am the solver. I like people who fix things, she said, smiling in a way that left him uncertain. Why did you choose this work? She asked. My father taught me, he said. He said dignity is doing something honest. Do you have family? She asked. A wife and a daughter, he replied. Kemi goes to St. Mary's. The school is strict about fees. Children should not worry about bills, she said. They should only learn to read and dream. We try, Samuel said, listening to the clink of a glass in the distance. How much do you charge on emergency calls? She asked. I don't believe in emergency prices, he said. I charge what I can and what the job costs. Send me an invoice, she said, handing him a business card. Come to the office next week. I want someone I can trust to call. 8 exchanges became 10 as they circled a mutual politeness that smelled like fresh paper and old loneliness. Every word was small, but each carried weight. She saw him as a utility. He saw her as a lifeline, and neither noticed, at first, the slow exchange of power that was starting. When the envelope arrived after his first visit to her office, it felt heavier than money should. He had been invited to the high-rise under the guise of a reference check. Instead, someone in an ivory blouse handed him an envelope that later revealed a payment far above what any mechanic in his neighborhood had seen. The scene in the office held a sensory richness. The air conditioning hummed low like distant water. The coffee tasted faintly of chicory. The leather chairs smelled of polish, and the receptionist's perfume left a floral trace on the paper. Esther had slipped a second card into his hand and said, "This is not charity, Samuel. Consider it a retainer." He had closed his fingers on the card, feeling the embossed name and the cool thickness of the cardstock. At home, Amina spread the bills on the table and watched the way his thumb brushed the gold letters. "Why would she do this?" she whispered. "Maybe she likes you," Amina said, half jealous, half grateful. "Maybe it's a test." That envelope changed the rhythm of dinner conversations. It introduced new silences and strange pride. The first moral small test came when Daniel called asking for a loan for market rent. Samuel hesitated, thinking of Esther's card in his wallet. He gave Daniel what he could, but kept most of the envelope for Kemi's school. That decision whispered that lines could be bent without necessarily breaking. A visit to Esther's mansion pulled him farther into a place where every surface reflected history and money. The gate opened with a hiss. The driveway smelled of cut grass and diesel from the gardener's machine. Inside, chandeliers whispered light across marble floors, and the butler, a man named Bernard, nodded with practiced discretion. The household carried names: Chioma, Esther's sister and often a voice of reason; Dr. Mensah, her longtime physician; Ada, her niece who studied law; Sergeant Kofi, the head of security; and Lillian, the house manager who knew how Esther liked her tea. Samuel was led through rooms that hummed with silence and portraits, and a faint aroma of jasmine followed him from the conservatory. In the parlor, he and Esther had a dialogue that ran long, 8 exchanges layered with subtle tests. "Do you feel comfortable here?" she asked. "It's very different," he said, fingers finding the seam of his chair. "It's not a place I belong," he admitted. "You belong wherever you are treated like a person," she replied. "What do you want, Samuel?" she asked. "For Kemi to finish school," he said simply, "and for Amina and I to wake without fear." "I can help," she said. "I have resources, and there are projects I fund. I like to know the people who do honest work." "Why me?" he asked. "Because you did not bow when the car stopped," she said. "You fixed it and left your dignity with it." Her words were a soft flint striking him. They sparked both gratitude and unease. The house smelled like old books and citrus. The cushions pressed cool against his palms, and the sound of the fountain outside made a steady punctuation to their words. Esther offered him a retainer, then an invitation, and then, in a voice that quieted the room, a personal favor that blurred lines. The envelope now contained a promise that would not be limited to tuition. In secret, they met more often, and what began as transactional edged into something more complicated. They spoke in low tones in hotel lobbies and in the back garden where the night smelled of wet stone and hibiscus. Conversations lengthened into confessions. "I am lonely," she said one night, voice husky like someone used to being listened to only by papers and portraits. "I have money, but I have few people who see me. I have too many responsibilities," he said. "I sleep and wake thinking of chemie school." "Do you ever want anything for yourself?" she asked. "A small thing," he said, thinking of a new pair of shoes or a book. "I used to want a radio when I was a boy," he admitted, "something that played songs at night." She laughed, a sound that did not belong beneath crystal chandeliers but felt honest. "I could buy you a radio," she said. "I could buy you a house." "I do not want charity," he said. "I want dignity." "Then let me give you work," she replied. "I will employ you for small repairs and keep you on retainer." Their words were simple, but the undercurrent was electric. They crossed a threshold of intimacy and secrecy. In those meetings, the sense of touch was present but not described in detail. Hands brushed, a coat was offered, and a warmth that was more than kindness was shared. They slept together once, in a hotel room where the hum of the city was a low drum, and after that, Esther grew quiet and then asked for privacy. Weeks later, she whispered that she might be pregnant. That revelation landed like a stone in Samuel's stomach. The room smelled suddenly of disinfectant and lemon, and outside the hotel, a taxi horn blared like someone who would not be calmed. The discovery set off a chain of consequences. Samuel retreated into silence. Amina noticed changes in his appetite and his late-night calls. He avoided telling Daniel, fearing the gossip that could spread like dust in the market. A tense appointment at the hospital with Dr. Mensah turned into a moment of revelation when an ultrasound confirmed a pregnancy. Samuel remembered the sterile smell of the clinic, the scratch of the pen on the hospital form, the way the fluorescent lights gave everyone a pallor. He felt both elated and terrified. A phone call that followed was sharp. Chioma had found messages and confronted Esther. "This will ruin us," Chioma had hissed in an argument. Samuel later heard from a distance. "How do you expect people to understand?" Esther's response was softer but resolute. "I know the truth of my choices." Samuel wanted to run. He wanted to carry Kemi and Amina into a new town and forget the glamour and the scandal. Instead, temptation hardened into a proposal that felt like a trap, an offer from Esther's nephew, Daniel Okafor, to sign a non-disclosure in exchange for a monthly stipend and relocation assistance for Samuel's family. The envelope he was handed felt heavier than the first. The ink of the contract smelled faintly of printer toner and legal finality. He read the terms with shaking hands and found clauses about silence, guardianship, and financial arrangements. He met with a lawyer at the local firm, Otieno and Partners, who explained in plain terms what a settlement would entail. "You will receive support," the lawyer said, "but you will have to give up certain rights." Samuel asked, "Would my daughter's name be affected?" The lawyer looked at him and said, "This is about protection of reputation." That word landed like a cold hand. Tensions rose in moments that felt like small earthquakes. The first major rupture came when a neighbor posted a whisper-turned post on a local social feed naming Esther and hinting at a scandal. Samuel read the thread in the dim light of his workshop, the phone's glow a small sun in his palm, and felt his chest tighten. People he had known for years stared with a new expression when he walked by. The market whispered. The school secretary looked at him with pity. That was one tension. Another came when Amina found a bracelet in his jacket pocket, a thin gold chain with a small charm engraved with initials she did not recognize. Amina's fingers trembled as she held it, the kitchen air smelling of stew and salt, and she asked questions that Samuel could not fully answer. "Who gave you this?" she demanded. "Why did you not tell me?" He tried to explain, but words became like oil on paper, sliding and staining. A third moment of tension came when Esther's sister Chioma threatened to go to the press. She stood at the gate with a printed letter, and her voice was sharp, the paper rustling as if the news had weight. "This will cost people their names," she said. You think money can smooth everything?" The confrontation played out in the bright sun, the smell of cut grass and diesel again mingling, and Samuel felt the world tighten around him. When the conspiracy formed, it was less a plot than a decision made by people protecting their interests. Daniel Okafor and a junior partner at the law firm suggested an arrangement that read like a compromise between morals and pragmatism. Esther's name would be protected, she would handle the appearance of responsibility, and Samuel would be given a lump sum and a monthly allowance if he signed an agreement. "We will relocate you," Daniel said in one meeting. "We will set you up with a small workshop in a quieter town." "And what if I refuse?" Samuel asked, each sentence feeling heavier than the last. "Refusal will mean the story goes public," Daniel said simply. The room smelled of printer ink and stale coffee. The air conditioning hummed, indifferent. "Think of your family," the junior partner added. "Is the price of honesty worth the ruin?" The moral calculus sat between them like a ledger. Samuel went home that night and sat on the step outside his house, the night air filled with the toast of insects and the distant sound of a television. He thought of Kemi's laugh, of Amina's hands kneading dough, of the possibility of fresh uniforms and paid tuition. He heard the echo of his father's voice about dignity, and the look on Esther's face the night she said she was pregnant. He was a man who repaired engines, not destinies, yet here he had to choose. The confrontation that resolved the crisis was public and private at once. A press note was leaked, not by Chioma, but by an angry coordinator at the estate who felt betrayed by Esther's secrecy. The tabloids gathered like vultures, and Samuel's street filled with whispers. Esther faced the cameras with a face made of practiced calm, and Samuel followed, palms sweating, the dust of his workshop still in the creases of his clothes. In front of microphones, Esther read a short statement. She would take responsibility for her choices. She would ensure the child had privacy and support, and she apologized for the pain caused. She also announced that she would close the foundation for a week to reorganize how it supported local entrepreneurs, including Samuel. Daniel Okafor, caught between loyalty and self-preservation, made a public note about respecting privacy. The community reaction split. Some called for her exile from elite circles, others praised her candidness. In quiet, Samuel and Amina chose to leave the neighborhood for a quieter town where a small workshop awaited. They took only what they could carry, a toolbox, a photo of Samuel's father, Kemi's school uniform. They signed the agreement after speaking with Pastor Abiola, who counseled patients, and Dr. Mensah, who advised medical privacy. The contract provided a sum that paid back market rent, months of tuition, and a modest house deposit. It also included a clause about silence, which sat like a bitter pill in Samuel's mouth. The epilogue arrived in measured time and modest details. 1 month later, Samuel had opened the new workshop on a dusty lane by the market. The paint was fresh, the sign crooked, and the smell of oil again became a comfort. Kemi began at a new school, bright blouse, and a bag that hung from her shoulder like a small flag. The community asked questions, but Samuel found in the work a rhythm that healed small things. 3 months later, Esther had resigned from one board and started a discreet program to fund tradespeople. She visited the hospital where her father had once been, paid for minor renovations, and quietly set up a scholarship in his name. Chioma had moved back to the family home with a different composure, and Daniel Okafor had learned the cost of clean reputation in private lawsuits and public apologies. Amina had started teaching evening classes at the local school, her voice steady as she read to children who smelled of chalk and soap, and Fatima brought over hot stews that tasted like home. 6 months later, the child had been born into a complicated household and a complicated story. The baby was healthy, the hospital bills handled, and the neighborhood slowly settled into new patterns. Samuel had purchased a basic radio, the one he had joked about as a boy, and he listened to it at night while tightening bolts. The small songs promising a future measured not only in money, but in choices made and lessons learned. He kept one of Esther's cards out of habit and another hidden in the toolbox, like a reminder that some things change a life and some things demand a cost. The final image was of Samuel closing the new workshop's metal gate at dusk, the paint smell rising, Kemi's laughter behind him, and a phrase that had once been a promise now felt like a steadying truth. Dignity had a price, but so did silence. If you were in Samuel's place, what would you have done? Would you have taken the card and the money, or walked away? Share your answer in the comments, starting with I would have or I would not have, and tell us why. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real stories of choices and consequences. There are more chapters to come, and life, like a workshop, keeps demanding repair.